Welcome to the Friday Focus podcast for the 15th of August. I'm Rudyard Griffiths, chair of the Monk Debates, joined by Janice Grostani, and she thankfully is not in studio today, and I'll tell you why in a moment. How are you feeling, Janice?
Well, I have a little granddaughter, and she had a small cold, but she gave me the mother of all colds.
There's nothing
It's a
worse.
good thing
Yeah,
today is Friday, and we didn't have to do this yesterday.
yeah, exactly. No, I'm very happy that we're doing this through Zoom because for me, like the summer cold in life's cruelties ranks
It
like
is.
9 out of 10. There's something
It
about the
is.
summer cold. I
And let
don't,
me
colds in winter are bad enough, but colds in the summer, Janice, I feel for you. Our audience does also.
let me just tell you, Rudyard, on the scale of 10, this is an 11.
Ouch. Okay, well, you take care of yourself. We are recording this, Janice, before noon on Friday, so we are not going to talk about the big Trump-Putin summit. We will do that later, either through a special episode of Friday Focus, if we think the news coming out of the summit warrants a special episode, or obviously on next week's program, because anything we say now, it would just be purely conjecture. We'd much prefer to give our audience some thoughts and ideas and debate and discussion around known facts as opposed to known unknowns. Does that sound good to you, Janice?
It sure does.
Well, let's talk about a known fact. This week, China hit back hard against Canada, levying what can only be described as punitive tariffs on canola, a major agricultural export from Canada to China and to the world. Many listeners and viewers might say to themselves, well, hey, what is canola? I've driven maybe by a canola field once in my life. Why is this a big deal? Well, up to 200,000 jobs are connected with the canola industry in Canada. It's effectively is larger than the auto sector, than a lot of the other steel and aluminum producers that we seem, Janice, to be really keen to protect and to stand up for. And I'm wondering, Janice, if we're starting to see both two concerning developments. One, Canada getting wedged now between China and the United States. And second, some kind of regional tensions emerging where central Canada sure likes to protect its industries. Western Canada, though, is exposed also. And maybe those of us here in the East don't understand the extent to which these are major exports that have large economic impacts inside the country and large job and employment implications also. And just because they're natural resources, just because they're agriculture, doesn't mean they're not as important as some of these industries that are getting a lot of the headlines like auto, steel, and aluminum.
I couldn't agree with you more, Roger. This is canola seed. There's a whole bunch of canola products that we export, and China's a huge market for us. Now, you're right to call these punitive. What did this come out of? This came out, this latest round, of Canada's decision to impose very high tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. And we did this for two reasons. The less important reason is would probably swamp if Chinese EVs came into Canada, it would probably swamp our own car manufacturing because these Chinese cars are cheaper and they're cleaner than most of what we're making. But the big incentive here, Rudyard, was the United States that did this before us, turned around, kind of growled in expectation that we were going to do it because we have an integrated market in cars and car parts. So if you're a Westerner right now, you're saying, my canola seed, which is a sophisticated product, is now being hit because we protected the auto sector in Ontario. The government has to take this just as seriously as it does protecting jobs in the auto sector.
Yeah, well said. And look, you know, you can never tell the future, but more and more our decision both to enact large-scale tariffs to protect our auto industry from Chinese EVs, combined with pledges of tens of billions of dollars of taxpayer funds to support the construction of battery plants by a variety of different auto manufacturers around the world, primarily in Ontario, has spectacularly blown up in our face. Not only are these battery plants and the whole EV market collapsed in Canada, we now have the Trump administration effectively walking away from what are called, CAFE standards. Those are the California emissions guidelines for cars that really determine the efficiency of the fleets of the auto manufacturers, and they've effectively stripped out both a lot of the green credits for EV vehicles in the United States, but even more of a threat to EVs in North America and the industry as a whole is the extent to which auto manufacturers will no longer, in a sense, be forced or required to have a greater and greater portion of their fleet, their product, at least in the United States, be green electric cars. So I don't know, Janice, I look at all this and I kind of wonder, have we, been too certain, too confident about some of these big industrial bets that we made under the Trudeau government? Because the world changes and we've had a kind of disruptor in chief in the White House. And this whole strategy now, again, is not only failing on its own terms and criteria, i.e. how many EV cars are being made and sold in North America, it's now having national unity implications. It's spilling over into other industries like agriculture, and it's putting us in the crosshairs of China at a time when we've got a heck of a fight on our hands already with the United States.
So I'm going to be a bit contrarian here, Roger, and say if we can stay the course over the long term, this has to be a good bet. I don't think there's a single Canadian this year who experienced probably the hottest summer that many of us can remember right across the country. In our cities, especially, it was steaming. These investments now, and you're right to say they've gone sour. They have, but they've gone sour largely because of the Trump administration and its step back.
Well, and consumer demand, Janice. To be fair, a lot of these battery plants are not going forward because people don't want to buy these cars. And, we're trying in Canada to force people to have a
cleaner car.
A green car, and an inability to buy, I think, a combustion engine. Is it by 2035? Well, good luck with that. But I don't know, Jess. I don't think that we can lay this all at Trump's feet. This has to do with consumer preferences. It has to do with the expense of these vehicles. It has to do with how they function, especially in a colder climate like Canada. Issues around reliability and distance, fueling, charging stations, the absence of
big one is charging.
A big
charging
infrastructure
stations
in Canada to support, the charging at scale that you would need to completely green your automobile fleet.
Yeah. But Roddy, if you think out 10 years, the Europeans, interestingly enough, are buying EVs. So the only major, and China, that's all there is, are EVs. And Chinese EVs are selling in countries like Brazil. So
and Europe, the Europeans have allowed Chinese EVs into Europe. So again, I just wonder why this absolutist position in Canada. If you care about the environment, I care about the environment. I care about the the wildfires that we've seen this summer. Why not give people cheaper EVs, better EVs, EVs made by the Chinese, just like the Europeans seem to have found a way to walk and chew gum at the same time, to have a domestic European auto industry, but allow a certain portion of these cheaper, very well made, supposedly excellent electric vehicles that are coming out of China that are really the best in class in the world.
So I'm going to give you an answer, and you can chuckle, Roger, but you're allowed. But the answer is, again, because of U.S. pressure on us over security issues. So what does that mean? If you need charging stations, all right? And these charging stations, Chinese-made cars, well, they'll be whatever, how many miles apart, but they will dot our landscape. And Chinese cars will plug in, Chinese EVs, because we're way behind. We'll catch up eventually, and it would actually be good to have a quota of Chinese EVs in Canada because it would ramp up the competition, frankly. But the issue is they're going to plug in. Drivers are going to download data. They're going to have Wi-Fi in their car. They're going to do all these things. All that data is going to go to China. So it comes at us, and this pressure came from the Senate. It comes at us as a security issue in a way that it doesn't to the Europeans because they don't live next door to the United States.
Sounds like a sovereignty issue also. I mean, that's a different way to look at it. Do we want to choose the cars that we drive, or do we want the U.S. Senate choosing them for us? I guess the other dimension of this that concerns me, Janice, is that understandably the Mark Carney government under political attack this week rushed out a pledge to, guess what, announce a whole big new list of subsidies for the canola industry. They've had a big set of subsidies for the steel industry, for the aluminum industry, for the auto industry. Every industry that gets tariffed gets subsidies. And I get that. This is part of how you respond to a threat and you could say a crisis that's not your making. But when you're not collecting countervailing duties on American imports, when you've chosen to be elbows down for some reason, a very interesting kind of change from the elbows up tone of Mark Carney during the election. If you're elbows down now and you're not really collecting much in the way of any retaliatory tariffs, then you're having to fund all of these new subsidies for even more industries in Canada. We already got banking, telcos, the entire cultural sector. I could go on, subsidized to the gills, and we're now adding whole big new industries to that growing list, again, funded by taxpayers, funded by debt and deficits.
Yeah, there's no question that this is a problem, Richard, and ultimately it's not sustainable. So let's think about subsidies the way Donald Trump should think about tariffs, but doesn't. Tariffs are a perfectly reasonable economic instrument if they're time limited and they're there to achieve a specific objective. You can use tariffs to grow an infant industry and let it get on its feet before it competes globally. Or you can use tariffs to really compel somebody else to change their unfair trading practices. That's not much evident in Donald Trump's thinking. And we have to be very careful that we use subsidies the same way. We can't have a subsidized car industry in Canada forever. We can't have subsidized aluminum or steel forever in this country. And we can't do it with our agri-food industry either. So my question really is not why do we have the subsidies? Of course we do. When we're trying now to renegotiate CUSMA, that's USMCA, that's NAFTA too, that's coming right at us, and we don't want to provoke the US president. It's much more, what's the economic plan for Canada to transition to much more competitive sectors? That's really what I'm waiting to see.
Yeah, ditto. Well, we may see some nods in that direction in the upcoming federal budget or not. We may see more subsidies for more industries, because that is a playbook, unfortunately, that we're very familiar with for the last number of decades. Again, with whole sectors and swaths of our economies, from telcos to banking to culture to the healthcare industries, education. The list goes on and on. I guess I wonder what's left. What is the part of the economy that's actually subject to real market forces, real competition dynamics that we know are leading indicators for future productivity growth, for wealth creation, for the very tax revenues the government is going to want to fund all of our social programs. But let's just wrap up this section of the show by going back to China, because I agree with you, Janice. We need a long-term strategy. You can't just subsidize your way out of a tariff war with the United States, especially when you're not, again, collecting reciprocal retaliatory tariff revenue. Should we be thinking about, as difficult as it is after the two Michaels, about resetting with China, about acknowledging that we do not have a bright future if we are fighting simultaneously the world's two great superpowers who perceive Canada, unfortunately, and I think correctly, as the weakest member of the G7, the weakest militarily, one of the weakest economically. You could even argue a country that often seems very divided about what it believes and what it stands for, what its purpose is, both regional divisions, but also cultural and other divisions inside our country. I mean, is this sustainable for us to be picking trade wars and trade fights, or having to respond to trade wars and trade fights from both superpowers at once?
So I think we already are, Richard. I think the government is already quietly exploring a shift. Let's talk for a second about what happened in the United States over the last 2 months between the United States and China. China rolled the United States on trade. It did it because it has a stranglehold right now on critical minerals, which the United States needs to boost its manufacturing sector. That is Donald Trump's mantra: bring manufacturing back to the United States. Well, if you don't have access to critical minerals, not only can you bring manufacturing back, you're actually going to diminish the manufacturing sector. So the Chinese stared him down, and Donald Trump blinked. And that's why China got another 90-day extension. Ottawa's not blind to this, Roger. They're seeing what's happening. The all-out competition through export controls, not through tariffs, of the Obama-Biden teams, frankly, is going. And we would be absolutely foolish in Canada not to be doing the same thing at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's say goodbye to our complimentary listeners and viewers. Thanks for tuning into the first half of Friday Focus. You want to get the back half of the show, where we're going to talk about a big blow up at the Toronto International Film Festival this week. An acute case of foot and mouth disease. We'll give you all the gory details, and that's exclusively for our Monk donors after this short break. Welcome back to Friday Focus. Rudyard Griffiths here, the chair of the Monk Debates, joined by Janice Gross-Stein, the founding director of the Monk School of Global Affairs. Well, Janice, I wanted to talk this week a little, maybe outside of our usual realm of international affairs and geopolitics, about a controversy that happened over the last few days here in Toronto with one of arguably the country's largest cultural institutions. That's the Toronto International Film Festival. It had previously accepted a film about the attacks of October 7th in Israel by a well-respected Canadian director, Barry Alvarez. And then seemingly, for reasons yet not entirely explained, decided to withdraw the invitation to screen this film. This caused a huge uproar and a subsequent reversal by the Toronto International Film Festival that then promised to work with Barry Alvarez and his film production company to, quote, resolve some legal issues that it had identified around copyright. I raise all this, Janice, because it's something that, the Monk debate has struggled with a bit in the past, which is the ability to find partners and venues to conduct and stage our main stage events, because sometimes, hey, we have controversial topics, we have controversial speakers. And I just wonder what your thoughts are about another major Canadian institution here kind of embracing this self-censorship, this I would say, abandonment of the best principles of free speech And yeah, we can talk about the impact on the Jewish community and issues around anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. But for me, this is really about free speech and the kind of society we want to have, and the extent to which I thought we relied on our major cultural institutions precisely to be the places and spaces where vigorous speech and debate could occur.
Boy, do I agree with you, Rudyard. I was so disappointed by what TIFF did. Let's just take a minute, because there were 3 issues that they raised. And the first 2 are really interesting because they speak directly to your point. The third one was copyright, as you said. And what that is when Hamas fighters crossed the border into Israel, they wore body cameras. And they took pictures.
They made snuff films, Janice. They made snuff films.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
what
right.
they did.
Okay, from GoPro cameras, and released that. And there is copyright. There are copyright issues on that. But look, Rudyard, that to me was such a transparent excuse. They are never going to get permission for Hamas to use for Barry from Hamas. Okay? Yeah. How can you take this seriously? And yet they've somehow resolved the issue because the film will be shown. So I don't take the copyright issue. I think that was a pretext rather than a real issue. What was in the letter that Cameron Bailey wrote to Barry?
Right. This is the head of TIFF. This is
Yes, the director of TIFF, who wrote a letter to Barry, the film producer, Barry Habersham, explaining why he was withdrawing the acceptance of this film at TIFF. 2 things. One, they anticipated protest, and you've encountered this with the mock debates. They anticipate protest, and they couldn't secure the premises. Well, look, if we give into this, the universities experience this, and we make a commitment that we will secure the premises. It is not that hard. There is, as you know, central doors to these facilities. It is possible to secure these premises, and the expenditure is not crippling. It's real, but it's not crippling. The next reason, and it was just a phrase in the letter, and boy, did that jump out at me, and there was opposition from my staff.
Right.
Wow. All right. Either when you're the leader of an organization, either when that happens, and it can happen, but you have a mission and a mandate, you spend a lot of time explaining to your staff why it matters that you fulfill that mission and that mandate. That cannot be a factor in making a determination of this kind. I think this was a huge miss by Cameron Bailey, and a really sobering lesson for all of us who, and I'm in that kind of a job. You certainly are, Rudyard, given the work that you do, that we allow a diversity of voices. I mean, for the record, Rudyard, there are 5 Palestinian films, as there should be at TIFF. So it is not that one side had privileged access here and Palestinians did not. This was just a really disappointing decision by Cameron Bailey.
Well said. And just to take up those 3 points, I mean, we've had the same problems at the Monk debates where, venues have said, well, whoa, wait a second. You can't have that debate here because, we can't ensure the safety of our staff at the event. And the fact is that, you can, and it requires security.
Yes.
We often at the Monk debates take on additional costs to provide that additional level of security. And for the Toronto International Film Festival to claim that it can't reach that same standard of security that the Monk debates reaches is just preposterous when they have big international stars that are coming through, I'm sure, that have all kinds of security requirements and security details. On the copyright issue with Hamas, it's just, talk about TIFF chasing its tail and trying to come up with this complete canard as to why to deny the screening of this film. If you are from a country that does not have a copyright treaty with Canada, you have no copyright standing in Canada. Palestine is not yet a state. Hamasistan has never been a state and never will be a state. So they're really, from my understanding of the legal analysis, this was just a complete canard. And then finally, because I think the most important point here, it's the one we run into most at the Monk debates, is the lack of leadership within our cultural industries and the extent to which these people who are in very high profile, in some cases, very high paid jobs, are weather vanes, and they blow east and they blow west and they blow north and they blow south. And, they talk about values and their commitment to, value X and value Y. But at the end of the day, there's the vast majority of them that I've met, and unfortunately in some cases have had to deal with in tense negotiations around the Monk debates, they're spineless. They are prevaricators. And I just think it's a sign, it's a symptom, Janice, unfortunately, of a bigger problem within our cultural industries, that they either are ill-educated or ill-informed or lazy about core principles that aren't necessarily the flavor of the month. Core principles like freedom of expression, like the extent to which I can and should have a right to hear sharply opposing ideas and perspectives. And that's part of what it means to live in a vibrant democracy.
Yeah. I think one of the reasons this hit home for me, the way it did, is it is connected to democracy, right? If we cannot sustain diversity of thought, and it's really interesting what this movie is about. It is not an explicitly political movie. It's the story of a retired general who rushes south on the morning of October the 7th to rescue his son and daughter-in-law and his two little grandchildren. And the film in question is the film that Hamas people took and released. And that is incorporated in the film. If TIFF can't show that, we're in deep trouble, frankly, if it blows with the wind. And, at times, and here's where I think there has to be steel in the leadership of our institutions, people will say things that offend other people in a whole variety of contexts, in the arts, in debates, in universities. But if we're not rock solid about defending people's rights to say things short of hate speech, short of that, and we're lucky in Canada.
We have those laws. We know exactly what the lines are. So you cannot say that we do not know what the lines are like the United States.
We do. We do here, and we're lucky. But we should be leaders, in fact, in allowing that diversity of thinking. And TIFF is it is an internationally recognized cultural institution in Canada. We don't have that many. TIFF is one. I'm so glad that it was reversed.
But let's hope there's.
It is disappointing.
Two final thoughts.
Let's hope there's a reckoning inside.
Like there has to be consequences here, and for people to say, well, why should there be consequences? Because last year the federal government alone announced $23 million of taxpayer funding for TIFF. Okay, so you and I are subsidizing TIFF. This institution is not a private institution like the Monk debates that is entirely self-funded, that receives no money from government. So if you don't like what a Monk debate's on, don't sweat it, because you're not subsidizing it. You, me, Janice, everyone listening to this is subsidizing TIFF. So I'm a stakeholder, whether I like it or not, in this organization. And as a stakeholder, I'd like to see the leadership be held accountable. I'd actually like to see a leader one day of one of these institutions resign because they did make the wrong choice, because they did fail their institution, because they were not a leader. I'm not going to hold my breath here, though, Janice. I think that's highly unlikely in this circumstance, like it's highly unlikely in every other circumstance when we have these organizations, running with scissors and, coming up short in so many ways in terms of the standards that the rest of us would expect. And unfortunately, As I said again, these are taxpayer-funded institutions to a large extent with, in this case, multiple millions of dollars of public subsidies going into them. They need to be held to a higher standard of accountability.
You know, Roger, just to bring this home, this is not the first incident with TIFF.
No.
There was one last year in which they refused to show a film made by a Russian director who followed Russian soldiers to the front, filmed and interviewed these soldiers about the experience of war. And there's a number of prominent journalists in Canada that were fully in support of TIFF's decision not to show that film. Now, I will tell you honestly, I was not. I thought, again, what are we doing here? First of all, people could learn something, right, from a film that actually interviewed Russian soldiers who were fighting a war against Ukraine, which I adamantly oppose. But even I would have watched that film because I would have thought, what can I learn from the film? Yeah. But what was so troubling was all the people who normally would be expected to defend freedom of speech. And I got into a couple of really heated arguments with people who, you know, called me some names. And I'm a big girl and I could take it because I said, no, that was a mistake. Yeah. When you do that once, it's easier to do it a second time. And that's how we lose our most treasured cultural institutions, when we legitimate that.
Well, we may have lost this one. I guess we'll have to see whether they grow a backbone, grow a spine or not. But again, I'm not going to hold my breath. Anyway, Janice, I'm glad we delved into this issue because it does go to the core of the Munk debates and why we're so grateful to have all of our Munk donors and funders supporting us. Because again, thanks to your support and the support of the Munk family, we have never received any government funding or support. We are entirely privately funded through charitable donations, through sponsorship, advertising, and elsewhere. So again, you can like the Munk debates. I think many of you do because you're a donor. But if you don't like what we do, at least you know that you're not funding it. Whereas we are all, again, funding TIFF indirectly through these massive, large-scale tax subsidies that this and so many other cultural organizations receive.
Okay, Roger, I will be watching tonight to see, I'm honest, to see what happens between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. High stakes poker. Everyone is playing.
Exactly. And we will get back to our audience. If there's some big developments coming out of the summit, we'll be sure to either pick those up with you this weekend on a special episode or take them up in full on next week's Friday Focus. We hope you've enjoyed the show and you are perusing the outcomes of this important summit happening in Alaska today, Friday, the 15th of August. Until next time, I'm Rudyard Griffiths. Bye-bye.